The lights are too bright for this kind of silence. A chair shifts slightly. Not enough to break the moment, but enough to make it worse. A breath is taken, then held. Somewhere off camera, a producer freezes, hand hovering just above the cue card that will never be used. The smile on one side of the sofa doesn't fade. It hardens. On the other side, a jaw tightens. Fingers press together. The calm is still there, but it's no longer relaxed. It's deliberate now. Controlled. Chosen. A sentence hangs in the air. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't rude. But it landed wrong. There's a pause, longer than television allows. Long enough for the audience to feel it in their chest. Long enough to realize this is no longer an interview. This is a confrontation. The host leans back slightly, eyes steady, voice measured. No theatrics. No apology. Just a quiet follow-up question, short, precise, impossible to dodge. The response comes fast. Too fast. Defensive. The tone sharpens. Status creeps into the room like an uninvited guest, demanding space, demanding understanding, demanding deference. And suddenly, the power in the studio shifts. Not because someone raised their voice, but because someone refused to lower theirs. The camera cuts tighter. A reaction shot catches a flicker of disbelief from the crew. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't cleared. This wasn't supposed to happen. The host doesn't interrupt. She lets the words finish. Lets them spill. Lets them expose more than they protect. Then she tilts her head slightly and asks again. This time, there's no answer, only deflection. A familiar script. A practiced grievance. The kind that usually works. The kind that usually ends conversations. But not today. The smile disappears now. Not in anger. In resolve. The audience at home senses it before it's said, a boundary has been crossed. And the person in control of the room has noticed. A producer whispers urgently off camera. The countdown clock keeps ticking. The red light stays on. And then the host leans forward, voice calm but unmovable, and says the words that change everything. Words that were never meant to be said live. Words that draw a line no one expected. Because what happens next won't just shock the guest, it will shock everyone watching. And this was only the beginning. This was never supposed to feel dangerous. The rundown was clean. Friendly. Controlled. A soft landing disguised as conversation. The kind of segment designed to soothe headlines. Not create them. A chance to be heard. A chance to reset the narrative. Everyone in the studio knew the rhythm. Smile. Empathy. Gentle nods. Move on. But something had already gone wrong. The first pushback was subtle. Almost polite. A clarification disguised as curiosity. The kind of question that usually passes unnoticed, unless you're listening closely. Unless you're not used to being challenged without hostility. The response came wrapped in practiced calm, but there was an edge now. A faint irritation, quickly masked. The camera caught it anyway. It always does. The host didn't retreat. She followed up. Not louder. Not sharper. Just clearer. And that's when the temperature in the room changed. A glance off camera. A micro-pause before answering. The rhythm breaks. The audience at home feels it instinctively, the moment when a guest realizes they're no longer steering the conversation. The stakes rise quietly. Because this isn't just about one question anymore. It's about control. The host reframes the issue, not as a personal grievance, but as a public contradiction. She speaks for viewers who've watched the same story unfold again and again. The ones who aren't invited into palaces or press tours. The ones who don't get to reset the narrative every time it slips. The guest shifts in his seat. He leans back now. Crosses his arms. The posture of someone who feels cornered, but refuses to admit it. The answers grow longer, more abstract. Responsibility blurs. Blame spreads outward. Institutions. Expectations. The media. Anyone but the man holding the microphone. The audience notices. So does the host. She lets him finish. Lets the words pile up. Lets the explanation stretch thin under its own weight. And then, without raising her voice, she brings it back to the original point. Simple. Direct. Undeniable. The reaction is immediate. A sharper tone. A defensive laugh. A reminder of who he is, where he comes from, what he's endured. The unspoken suggestion hangs in the air, this should be enough. It usually is. But not here. The host doesn't flinch. Because she's not attacking a person. She's questioning a narrative. And that distinction matters. The cameras tighten again. The studio audience falls quiet. Even the crew senses it now, this is no longer a segment you can cut around. Whatever happens next will make the edit, whether anyone likes it or not. A producer whispers urgently from the side. The clock is slipping. They're behind schedule. No one moves to stop it. The host asks one more question, calmer than before. Slower. The kind of question that doesn't accuse, but demands honesty. This time, the answer doesn't land. It circles. It deflects. It avoids the heart of the matter entirely. And for the first time, the illusion breaks. The guest realizes he's not being misunderstood. He's being challenged. The audience realizes this isn't about sympathy anymore. It's about accountability. The host exhales softly, nods once, as if confirming what she already suspected. The smile is gone now, replaced by something steadier. Firmer. The power in the room has shifted, and it's not shifting back. Because the next part of this conversation won't be comfortable. It won't be controlled. And it will force both of them to choose how far they're willing to go, live, unfiltered, and impossible to take back. And that's when the cracks begin to show. He didn't walk into the studio as a villain. That's the part most people miss. He walked in carrying something far more dangerous, certainty. The kind that comes from a lifetime of insulation. From being told, repeatedly, that intentions matter more than outcomes. That pain outweighs responsibility. That explanation equals absolution. From the outside, the story is framed as courage. A man stepping out of the shadow. Speaking his truth. Breaking cycles. But beneath that language sits a contradiction that's grown harder to ignore with every interview, every book, every carefully curated confession. Because the more he speaks, the louder the question becomes, if you want privacy. Why does the world keep hearing from you? He condemns the media, then relies on it. He denounces exploitation, then monetizes exposure. He pleads for understanding, while demanding exemption from scrutiny. And for a long time, that contradiction went unchallenged. Why wouldn't it? He's learned how to tell the story well. Trauma placed front and center. Context softened. Responsibility diffused. The narrative always bends back toward the same conclusion: he didn't choose this life, it happened to him. That framing works. Especially when audiences want to be compassionate. Especially when institutions have failed before. Especially when grief is real. But compassion turns brittle when it's used as armor. Inside the studio, that armor begins to crack. Because this host isn't attacking his pain, she's questioning his consistency. And those are not the same thing. For years, the playbook has been simple: challenge becomes persecution, disagreement becomes cruelty, accountability becomes harassment. Anyone pushing back is framed as part of the same oppressive system. The same faceless enemy. It's an effective defense. Until someone refuses to accept it. The discomfort on his face isn't outrage, it's confusion. He's not used to this version of resistance. Not the loud kind. Not the hostile kind. But the calm kind that doesn't blink. The kind that listens fully. And then asks again. The answers grow longer. More philosophical. Less specific. The tone shifts subtly from explanation to justification. From sharing to self-protection. And that's when the audience starts noticing the pattern. Every criticism is redirected. Every inconsistency softened. Every choice reframed as necessity. There's always a reason. Always a context. Always a deeper meaning that somehow absolves the surface contradiction. But the host isn't interested in layers today. She's interested in clarity. Because clarity is dangerous to someone who relies on ambiguity. The guest leans back now. The posture changes. Arms fold tighter. His words speed up slightly, not rushed, but defensive. The cadence of someone trying to stay ahead of the question rather than answer it. Status creeps into the conversation uninvited. Not overtly. Not arrogantly. Just enough to remind the room who he is. Where he comes from. What he's endured. The implication is subtle but familiar, this should earn patience. It always has. But patience is not agreement. And this is the moment where the audience realizes something crucial. This isn't a clash of personalities, it's a clash of worldviews. One believes explanation should end scrutiny. The other believes explanation invites it. The guest isn't malicious. He isn't cruel. But he is unused to resistance that doesn't ask permission. Unused to being held to the same standard as those without titles, without platforms, without inherited relevance. The irony is sharp. A man who claims to have escaped power still expects its protections. And now, live on air, those protections are evaporating. The host doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't accuse. She simply refuses to move on. And that refusal exposes everything. Because when the talking points run out. When the sympathy no longer shields. When the narrative stops bending. All that's left is the question he never expected to face here: what if the problem isn't how you're being treated? But how you're responding to it? The silence that follows isn't dramatic. It's revealing. And for the first time, the audience sees it clearly, not a prince under attack, but a man unprepared to be challenged without control. He shifts again in his seat. And somewhere between the studio lights and the rolling cameras, he realizes something has gone wrong. Because the next phase of this conversation won't be about his story anymore. It will be about his answers. And that's where the real confrontation begins. She didn't arrive here by accident. Long before this studio, before the lights and auto cues and carefully timed breaks, she learned how to listen, really listen, without flinching. Not to power. Not to polish. Not to performance. But to people. Ordinary ones. The kind whose stories don't come with handlers or spin. Decades in broadcasting will teach you one thing fast: charm fades, narratives rot, but patterns never lie. She's seen them all. Politicians rehearse to the syllable. Celebrities mistaking vulnerability for virtue. Powerful men confusing attention with absolution. And every time, the same test appears, not of intelligence, but of integrity. Lorraine built her reputation on something unfashionable: consistency. She doesn't ambush. She doesn't flatter. She doesn't shout to win. She asks. Then she listens. And if the answer doesn't hold, she asks again. That discipline didn't come from prestige. It came from years of earning trust, one interview at a time. From knowing the audience isn't stupid, just patient. From understanding that respect doesn't mean surrender. And that's why this moment matters. Because Lorraine isn't here to dominate the guest. She's here to represent the millions watching who don't get to ask follow-up questions. The ones who've noticed the contradictions stacking up. The ones told, repeatedly, that discomfort equals cruelty. She knows better. Fairness isn't silence. Empathy isn't exemption. And dignity doesn't collapse under scrutiny. As the conversation tightens, something in her posture changes. Not aggression, resolve. The kind that comes when you realize politeness has done all it can do. She stops nodding. Not to signal disrespect, but to signal clarity. The smile she began with isn't gone because she's angry. It's gone because the performance phase is over. This is no longer about being agreeable. It's about being honest. And honesty, she knows, is the most dangerous thing you can offer someone used to control. She's not thinking about headlines. She's not thinking about backlash. She's thinking about one thing only: if I move on now, I become part of the problem. So she stays. She holds the line, calmly, professionally, unmovably. Because this isn't just an interview. It's a moment where the public finally sees someone refuse to bend. And that quiet refusal is about to collide head-on with a man who's never been told no like this, live, composed, and impossible to reframe. The air in the studio tightens. And that's when the conversation stops circling. And starts colliding. Because the next exchange won't be polite, it will be decisive. The shift is subtle, but irreversible. The questions shorten. The answers lengthen. A classic tell. The sign of someone explaining instead of responding. Lorraine leans in slightly. Not invading space. Just enough to signal attention. Control. Presence. She asks again. Same point. Different wording. This time, the response sharpens. There's a laugh, quick, defensive, misplaced. A tonal mismatch the audience feels instantly. The kind of laugh that tries to lighten a moment that refuses to be lightened. The guest interrupts. Once. Then again. Not aggressively, but insistently. As if volume might restore balance. As if momentum might replace substance. It doesn't. Lorraine doesn't interrupt back. She lets him speak. That's the trap. Because the longer he talks, the more the contradictions surface. Words pile up. Justifications overlap. The explanation grows crowded with grievances, media. Institutions, expectations, history. Everything except the question. The studio audience senses it now. That low, collective awareness when something unscripted is happening. When you're watching not for information, but for outcome. The host finally steps in. Not sharply. Not emotionally. Precisely. She isolates one sentence from his response. Just one. Repeats it slowly. Then asks the simplest possible follow-up. And suddenly, there's nowhere to go. The guest shifts in his seat. His posture tightens. The confidence that carried him through countless interviews begins to flicker, not vanish, but destabilize. This isn't hostility. This is exposure. His tone changes. Less reflective. More defensive. Status creeps back in, subtly, but unmistakably. References to experience. To suffering. To intent. The unspoken appeal is clear, surely this counts for something. Lorraine nods once. Acknowledgement, not concession. And then she says the sentence that raises the temperature in the room, a calm reminder that intent doesn't erase impact. The reaction is immediate. The guest pushes back harder now. Words clip. Pace quickens. The composure he began with is still there, but it's strained. Held together by effort rather than confidence. Behind the cameras, producers exchange looks. This isn't recovery anymore. It's escalation. Lorraine holds eye contact. Doesn't blink. Doesn't soften the point. She isn't cruel, but she's no longer cushioning the truth. And the audience realizes something profound. This is the first time he's been challenged without theatrics, without hostility, without an exit ramp. There's no villain edit to hide behind. No outrage to redirect. Just a woman calmly refusing to move on. The silence after her last question is heavier than anything spoken so far. Second stretch. The guest opens his mouth, then closes it. And in that moment, the power dynamic flips completely. Because the next move isn't his. It's hers. And whatever she says next won't just escalate the debate, it will end it. Because this is the moment right before the mic drop. The silence doesn't break on its own. It's broken by choice. Lorraine doesn't rush it. She lets the quiet stretch just long enough to feel intentional, long enough for the audience to register that something has shifted, and it isn't coming back. Then she speaks. Slowly. Clearly. Without edge. Not to provoke, but to pin the moment in place. She repeats his last point back to him. Word for word. No distortion. No spin. And in doing so, she does something devastating. She removes the drama from it. Strips it down until only the logic remains. And suddenly, it doesn't sound convincing anymore. The camera tightens. A close shot catches the smallest flicker of surprise on his face. This isn't the response he's trained for. There's no outrage to deflect. No hostility to condemn. Just his own words, calmly reflected back at him. Lorraine pauses. Then asks the question that changes the temperature in the room. It isn't accusatory. It isn't emotional. It's inescapable. A question built on sequence. On cause and effect. On accountability. Not why did you feel this way? But what did you do next, and who did it affect? The audience leans in. Because this isn't a clash anymore. It's a test. The answer comes slower this time. More cautious. He chooses words carefully now, as if precision might rebuild control. But the confidence is gone. The cadence wobbles. There's a subtle over-explaining, the tell of someone trying to regain footing. Lorraine doesn't interrupt. She lets him talk. That's the second trap. Because when he finishes, she doesn't challenge the emotion. She challenges the outcome. She points out the gap, gently, surgically, between intention and consequence. Between what was said and what was done. Between the narrative he's telling and the reality others experienced. No judgment. No insult. Just clarity. And clarity hits harder than outrage ever could. There's a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, where he looks off to the side. Not at the host. Not at the camera. Somewhere else. Somewhere safer. Somewhere that doesn't exist in this studio. The audience feels it immediately. This is the first time he's not performing. This is the first time he's reacting. Lorraine leans forward slightly now. Not aggressive, but anchored. Her voice lowers, not to intimidate, but to focus the room. She explains, calmly, respectfully, why the conversation can't move on yet. Why sharing your truth doesn't end responsibility. Why public platforms demand public standards. She speaks as if she's speaking for millions who've never been allowed to finish a sentence. The guest tries to push back, but it's weaker now. Less assured. The words overlap. The structure phrase. He returns to familiar ground, context, history, pressure, pain. Lorraine nods. Acknowledges it. Then, without raising her voice, she delivers the line that lands like a gavel: pain explains behavior. It does not excuse it. The studio freezes. Even the air seems to stop moving. The audience doesn't gasp. They don't murmur. They go silent, the kind of silence that only happens when a truth lands clean. For the first time, the power in the room is unmistakably hers. Not because she took it. Because he lost it. He attempts one final defense, shorter, tighter, less confident than before. But the spell is broken now. The words don't carry weight anymore. They sound like echoes of something that worked once, somewhere else. Lorraine waits for him to finish. Then she nods once. And draws the boundary. She says it plainly. Respectfully. On the record. That this conversation can't continue in the way it's going. That accountability isn't optional. That the platform she controls has limits, and those limits have been reached. No anger. No spectacle. Just a decision. The kind that doesn't invite debate. The camera cuts wide. The crew is visible now, stunned, motionless. A producer's hand lifts, then drops. No one interrupts. No one dares. Because everyone understands what's happening. This isn't a meltdown. It's an ending. The guest looks up sharply, not furious, but shocked. As if the idea that this could happen here never fully occurred to him. As if the rules he assumed were universal have suddenly expired. Lorraine doesn't gloat. She doesn't justify. She simply thanks him for coming. And signals off camera. That's the mic drop. Not a shout. Not a walk-off. But a calm assertion of authority that can't be reframed, clipped out of context, or softened in post. The red light goes off. For half a second, no one moves. Then the studio erupts, not in noise, but in motion. Crew scrambling. Producers whispering urgently. The machinery of television waking up to the fact that something historic just happened. And somewhere outside that studio, on phones, on timelines, on feeds refreshing in real time, the moment is already spreading. Clips uploading. Captions writing themselves. Opinions forming instantly. Because what just happened wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a public demonstration of something rarely seen on live television. A powerful man told, calmly, professionally, unmistakably, that status does not outrank accountability. And the world is about to react. Because once the mic drops like that, the shockwaves don't stay contained. The clip doesn't crawl across the internet. It detonates. Within minutes, phones light up. Notifications stack. Group chats explode with the same question phrased a dozen different ways: did you just see that? Someone uploads the first raw clip, shaky, cropped, imperfect. It doesn't matter. The moment is already bigger than production quality. Bigger than context. Bigger than spin. By the time the official account posts its version, the narrative has escaped. Hashtags begin to trend before the hour is over. Some in disbelief. Some in celebration. Some in outrage. The lines form instantly, not between left and right, but between entitlement and accountability. Commentators scramble. Morning shows rewrite their rundowns on the fly. Panelists who hadn't planned to talk about it suddenly have nothing else to discuss. The question isn't what happened, everyone saw that. The question is what it means. Supporters rush in first. They frame it as disrespect. As ambush. As cruelty disguised as professionalism. The familiar defenses reappear, faster than ever, as if repetition might undo what millions just watched with their own eyes. But something's different this time. The clip doesn't show shouting. It doesn't show provocation. It doesn't show hostility. It shows composure. And composure is hard to attack. Others push back, not loudly, but confidently. They replay the moment frame by frame. They point out the pauses, the calm tone, the repeated chances given, the boundary stated clearly, respectfully, and live. This wasn't cancellation. It was consequence. Celebrities weigh in, cautiously at first. Some hedge. Some stay silent, waiting to see which way the wind blows. A few speak plainly, praising the host for doing what so many won't, refusing to trade truth for access. Journalists write think pieces overnight. Not summaries, interpretations. Because the facts are simple. The implications are not. A royal figure, removed from a studio mid-conversation. Not by scandal. Not by outrage. But by refusal. Refusal to move on. Refusal to soften the truth. Refusal to surrender control of the room. Clips of the moment rack up millions of views before sunrise. Reaction videos flood platforms, faces frozen in disbelief, rewinding the same 10 seconds over and over again. Not to mock. To confirm it really happened. Memes appear, but they're different than usual. Less cruel. More pointed. Captions like "This is what accountability looks like" circulate faster than insults ever could. The host's name trends, not as controversy, but as conviction. And that's when the real reversal becomes impossible to ignore. For years, the guest controlled the narrative by speaking first, longest, and loudest. By flooding the zone with explanation. By framing every pushback as persecution. But this time, he doesn't dominate the conversation. He disappears from it. Not physically, but symbolically. Because the moment he lost control of the room, he lost control of the story. Attempts at clarification emerge. Statements carefully worded. Sources speaking anonymously. Context offered retroactively. But the damage is already done, not because it was unfair, but because it was clear. Clarity leaves no space for reinterpretation. The public reaction solidifies into something rare and dangerous to power: agreement across difference. People who disagree on almost everything else nod at the same conclusion. That should have happened sooner. And suddenly, the conversation widens. It's no longer just about one interview. It's about platforms. About who gets endless patience, and who never does. About the difference between vulnerability and deflection. The host, meanwhile, doesn't celebrate. She doesn't tweet victory laps. She doesn't grant interviews explaining herself. She lets the moment speak. Because she understands something crucial: when you act from principle, you don't need to explain it. By the next news cycle, the question has flipped entirely. Not "why did she do that?" but "why don't more people?" And that's when it becomes clear this wasn't just a viral moment. It was a warning shot. A reminder that even the most protected figures are only powerful as long as everyone agrees to play along. That agreement was broken, live, calmly, and without apology. And now, the world is watching to see what breaks next. Because once accountability goes viral, it doesn't stop with one name. By the time the noise settles, one thing is unmistakable: this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about drawing a line. Stripped of titles, stripped of outrage, stripped of spectacle, the moment stands on something far more durable: principle. The kind that doesn't need volume. The kind that doesn't need allies in the room. The kind that holds even when the cost is real. Because what happened on that set wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. For years, the public has been told that asking follow-up questions is aggression. That skepticism is hostility. That discomfort equals harm. The rules quietly changed, and most people didn't notice until accountability started disappearing entirely. Lorraine noticed. She didn't raise her voice to make a point. She didn't humiliate to assert authority. She didn't trade kindness for compliance. She simply refused to move on. And that refusal mattered. Because moving on is how contradictions survive. It's how power avoids consequence. It's how narratives calcify into accepted truth without ever being tested. The moment forces a reckoning that goes far beyond one guest or one show. It asks a question many would rather avoid: who gets infinite grace, and who gets none at all? The answer, for a long time, has been shaped by proximity to power. By fame. By legacy. By the ability to command attention and sympathy at the same time. But grace without accountability isn't compassion. It's permission. And permission, once granted indefinitely, erodes trust, not just in institutions, but in truth itself. This is where the moment transforms. Because Lorraine doesn't position herself as a hero. She positions herself as a standard. A reminder that dignity doesn't require deference. That empathy doesn't demand silence. That public platforms carry public responsibility, for everyone who uses them, no matter how polished their pain may be. The lesson lands not as accusation, but as invitation. An invitation to expect better. To ask again when answers don't hold. To resist the pressure to accept performance in place of substance. The beauty of the moment isn't that someone powerful was challenged. It's that the challenge was calm. No shouting. No spectacle. No cruelty disguised as courage. Just a boundary, drawn clearly, and held. And that's why it resonated. Because most people know what it feels like to be talked over. To be told their concerns are inconvenient. To be asked to accept explanations that don't quite explain anything. Watching someone calmly refuse that script feels like relief. Like validation. Like possibility. This moment doesn't tell the audience who to support. It reminds them what to value. Consistency over charisma. Accountability over access. Truth over comfort. And perhaps most importantly, it restores something that's been quietly missing from public discourse, the idea that respect is mutual, not hierarchical. That you don't earn immunity through status. You earn trust through behavior. Lorraine didn't end a conversation. She elevated it. By refusing to participate in deflection, she forced a higher standard into the room, one that now follows the story wherever it goes. And that's the real legacy of the moment. Not outrage. Not division. But a reset. A reminder that when someone stands their ground without malice, without ego, without fear, they don't just change the tone. They change the rules. And once the rules change, there's no going back to the way things were. Because truth, once calmly spoken, has a way of lingering. The lights fade. The cameras stop rolling. The red studio glow disappears. But the impact doesn't. What happened on that set wasn't a simple interview. It wasn't drama for ratings. It was a lesson in courage, clarity, and accountability. One person refused to bend to power. One voice refused to be silenced by status. And in doing so, the world saw something rare: dignity winning over arrogance, truth prevailing over entitlement. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about principle. A reminder that no platform, no privilege, and no title can shield you from the consequences of your words, or the public's expectation of honesty. And that's the takeaway: courage doesn't need volume. Integrity doesn't need applause. The quiet strength to stand your ground, to demand clarity, and to insist on accountability, that's what changes conversations, institutions, and culture. Now it's your turn. Don't just watch. Reflect. Share. Challenge what needs challenging in your own world. Recognize when truth is being softened for comfort, and refuse to accept it. If this story moved you, not because of scandal, but because of courage, hit subscribe. Share this video with someone who needs to see that principle still matters. Join a community that values honesty over entitlement, calm over chaos, and action over excuses. Because when courage meets truth, even the most insulated, entitled voices have to listen. And the world is watching.